So today we're going to talk a bit about cold exposure, which has been really popularized recently by people like Wim Hof. I mean, I say recently, in the past few years, but it's become a very popular movement. Cold showers, ice baths, all these things. But why do you actually need to take them? Because so many of us have just heard that thing, like, yeah, bro, it increases discipline, it makes you do things that you don't want to do. And these are true, but there are also some very real health benefits to taking cold showers, which we're going to start to discuss today. We're going to go over the neuroscience of cold exposure, the physiological benefits of it, and go very in depth as to exactly what it does. So what actually happens to your body when you get cold? And first of all, tiny little temperature receptors all over your skin detect that drop in temperature, and they say, oh fuck. And they send a signal through little nerve fibers to the hypothalamus, which is a part of your brain that's kind of responsible for a lot of autonomic control. So some people call it the thermostat of the brain. And it gets that signal and it says, oh fuck. And so it sends a signal through something called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, but you can just call it the HPA axis because we're on a first name basis now. And it sends a signal to that to release two neurotransmitters and hormones called norepinephrine and epinephrine. These are also called noradrenaline and adrenaline. And these have huge impacts across the whole body, but basically they stimulate something called sympathetic arousal. So if you watched our video on how to be more energetic, but also how to have better rest, you'll know that there's two kind of coexisting nervous systems within us. You've got the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Actually, cold immersion is quite interesting because it activates both. But for now, let's talk about the sympathetic arousal. So it triggers that kind of fight or flight response because it feels that external stress. And so instantly, your body will constrict all your blood vessels to keep the blood inside of your core, stop it from going out to the extremities, because basically it thinks, I'd rather lose a finger than my life. It does various things like that. What else did it do? We've got the list here. It also activates brown fat, and this is very important, is to understand the difference between brown fat and white fat, and it's going to play a key role in this video. But basically white fat, in the least mean way possible, is a lot of the visible fat that you see. And then brown fat is the fat around organs, and basically it is white fat with more mitochondria, so it has more energy in it. And it's responsible more for thermogenesis, which is the process of warming up the body, whereas white fat is more of an energy storage source. So the long and short of it basically is that brown fat is more important than white fat. And then finally, you start to shiver. So everyone knows that your muscles start to contract extremely quickly, and that is just called shivering. And what that does is two things. Number one, it releases a compound called succinate, which creates more brown fat. We'll get onto that. Yes, it's a hilarious name. But also, it increases your metabolic rate. I mean, just think about it like that. If your body is naturally twitching fucking thousands of times a minute, that's like going on a run. I think there's been studies that have shown that people that have nervous twitches, just constantly bobbing their legs or whatever, burn an extra 1,600 calories a day or something. But anyway, those are the things that a cold shower does. It also activates your parasympathetic nervous system though, which is what we just spoke about. And that's because your body has something called a dive response. So when it comes into contact with water, it kind of goes okay, so maybe we're going to have to hold our breath here. So it calms you down a lot as well. So it's very weird. On the one hand, it stimulates you. On the other hand, it calms you down. But this is where a lot of the physiological benefits of the cold shower come in. But that's not all, because once you get out of the cold shower, you're going to experience something called the afterdrop, which is basically when you get really fucking cold again. And this happens because when your temperature starts to increase a bit, your blood vessels dilate again, and blood rushes to your surface. It goes all the way out to your hands and your fingers, because it's fuck, we need to give them some blood right now. And it goes there, but when it comes into contact with the skin is still ice cold. And so the blood rushes back into the kind of core. But now the blood has been cooled down by the surface temperature, and so when it comes back into the core, it drops core temperature, and you experience an afterdrop. So you experience another decrease in temperature. And that can be quite anxiety-inducing for some people, so it's important to know that that is a phenomenon that happens with cold showers. But once again, that isn't a bad thing. That's where a lot of the longer lasting effects of cold showers come in. Because of that afterdrop, because of that continued shivering, up to a few hours after the shower, or the cold immersion, that really is what triggers the metabolic rate. Because the thing is, if you're just in a cold shower for 2 or 3 minutes and your metabolism's fired up, cool, but it's not like you're going to fucking come out of it a supermodel, do you know what I mean? If consistently though, for 2 or 3 hours every single day, you can have an activated metabolism, then that actually can have lasting impacts on your metabolic function. But why would you go through the discomfort? Because cold showers are uncomfortable. We have to accept that fact, and essentially the reasons are due to mental effects and physical effects. And we're going to go over those one by one. We're going to start though with the mental effects. So in the most basic sense, cold exposure acts like a very reliable stressor that you can put your body through every day and not really have many bad effects, but expose your body to a low level of stress. And this low level of stress is called hormesis. It's basically when, well, like we said, we expose your body to small levels of stress so that it can adapt to larger levels of stress in the future. So through this process, you're basically teaching your brain and your body and just everything about yourself to adapt and work better in stressful scenarios. Because if you can maintain a sense of calm inside of a cold shower, then you can maintain a sense of calm when something else stressful occurs in your life. That is one of the big mental benefits, but also cold exposure alongside that norepinephrine and epinephrine release that we spoke about triggers a lot of other catecholamines. So catecholamines are the kind of group of chemicals that affect different things in your mood. They're neurotransmitters and neuromodulators. So things like norepinephrine, things like dopamine. And dopamine is the next one. Basically, and according to a study by Sramek, and I have no clue how you say that, but I'll have it on the screen, and it was published in 2000 and called Human Physiological Responses to Immersion into Water at Different Temperatures, which is a very interesting study. But basically what it showed was that plasma concentration of norepinephrine and dopamine increased by 530% and 250% respectively. And I'm going to have that graph up on the screen because it's a very interesting graph to see. Basically, a cold shower spikes dopamine by up to 2.5% your baseline. So that's similar to things like cocaine use, and it's similar to things like pornography use and orgasm and masturbation. It's a huge spike in dopamine, but it's a very different kind of spike because it's much more long lasting. The study found that after even about 2 to 3 hours after the cold immersion, that dopamine peak still maintained, well, its peak. So it's a much more healthy way of achieving that dopamine spike. Also, it's not as addictive as other things, and it doesn't have other physiological downsides. But the good thing to know is that cold showers actually make you feel good. So that euphoria that you feel after the shower is real. It's because you genuinely have more dopamine in your system. And then just linked to that, I'm going to put a study here which showed that increases in these catecholamines, so increases in norepinephrine and dopamine, improved cognitive function. There was a study done in basically athletes where it would send people out on a 15-minute jog. I think it was 15 minutes, I'm not exactly sure. And then it would send another group to do a 15-minute meditation. And then it would test their cognitive abilities inside of various tests. And strangely enough, the people that had gone on the jog actually performed better. And the assumption, therefore, is that actually it was due to this kind of catecholamine release, which is very similarly triggered in cold showers. So the theory kind of goes, or at least the hypothesis goes, that cold showers can increase your cognitive function in a very similar way. But as we spoke about, cold exposure also has huge physical effects. And basically a lot of these are linked to metabolism, like we briefly spoke about. So let's get more in depth into what white fat and brown fat is. Like we said, white fat is basically the energy store, and brown fat, or sometimes called beige fat, which is like the precursor to brown fat, is white fat that has more mitochondrial density and sensitivity. And basically, for the context at least of cold showers, and as I have written on my notes right here, brown fat is sort of created by norepinephrine. So norepinephrine binds to receptors on white fat cells and activates it activates a downstream pathway called UCP1. And that increases mitochondrial output and density in the fat cells. By the way, it's also called brown adipose tissue. So if you hear that, or BAT, that's basically what I'm talking about, brown fat. And so when we get cold, norepinephrine activates this brown fat, and it starts up something called thermogenesis, which is basically the body's way of getting warm. And the brown fat is very good at doing this. It converts its energy through its mitochondria to create warmth. And it's much more efficient at doing that than white fat. So for example, you need less of it. Basically, it's a less dense form of fat. So the more white fat you can convert to brown fat in the most bro-science way possible, the more lean you will be. So it does do that. There are other pathways though. So there's also a direct pathway straight from the skin's receptors which directly activate the brown fat. And then like we spoke about before, shivering also releases succinate, which triggers brown fat too. So having a higher metabolism is great. I mean, it's great for that weight loss thing that we keep talking about, but for people like me who don't really need to lose weight and we need to fucking gain it, It is still good to have a high metabolism, or at least a higher metabolism. It's better for your energy levels, it's better for your conversion of food into energy. It is just a good thing to have in general, but cold showers have many more physiological benefits, and the biggest ones are actually things like a reduction in inflammation. So very recently, and if you go and watch my video on depression and novel treatments of depression specifically, we went into how inflammation recently has actually been shown to very much be linked with depression. So people with higher inflammation levels are more likely to suffer from major depression. And things like cold showers greatly reduce the amount of cytokines in your body, which is directly linked to the amount of depression that you have. So cytokines create inflammation, which creates depression, and so on and so forth. But basically, things like cold showers can be great. They can be very beneficial for that. They can be very beneficial for the reduction in inflammation. But also, as that same study found by that Sramek guy, who I'll link again, I'll put the graphs up now, but it also reduced blood pressure and the heart rate for quite prolonged periods of time too, which again is a very good thing. Having lower blood pressure is linked with a lot of things like longevity and just wider health. So how do you actually do it? So you've watched the video and you've decided, yeah, do you know what, I want to take cold showers, but how do you actually go on and do it? Because it isn't as simple as just sitting in the shower and turning the water onto cold. There are so many questions. How long do you do it? How do you do it? You're supposed to breathe it, you're supposed to be energetic, whatever. What are you supposed to do? And there was a study by Susanna Soberg, and I'll put the title of it here because I don't remember off the top of my head, to be honest. But it came up with something that's been dubbed since the Soberg principle. And that kind of refers to a few things. The first thing it refers to is that in that study they found that 11 minutes cumulatively of cold exposure a week was what was needed to activate these sort of benefits in things like your metabolism. And that's cumulative, right? So maybe it'd mean you do a 3 minute, a 3 minute, a 3 minute and a 2 minute cold exposure per week, or maybe you do a 5 minute and a 6 minute exposure per week. But cumulatively you should be aiming for at least 11 minutes as the threshold. Don't go too high, obviously. If you're hitting like fucking hours of cold exposure a week, it's actually bad for you. That's too much stress, and it's not hormesis anymore, it's just chronic stress that you're inducing your body. But yeah, if you can have like a good few minutes of cold exposure every day, get to that 11 minute number, then great. Another thing she talks about is ending on cold. So it's the idea of when you're cycling between a hot shower and a cold shower, because some people do that as part of their protocol, to always end in the cold state, because essentially what we spoke about, that afterdrop, where your body reduces temperature and you continue to shiver and have that metabolic increase for a few hours after the shower's over. So they're very important, but how do you do it? Basically, the water should be, as Andrew Huberman says, it should be so cold that you're kind of like uncomfortable but not unsafe. So basically you should be there like, okay, I want to get out, but I could stay in if I absolutely had to. That's the level that the water should be at. And then yeah, stay into it for however long you can. He also speaks about this thing called like epinephrine walls, which is basically every time you have that mental urge to leave the environment, if you can overcome that stressor, that's when you get a lot of the mental benefits, the things like endurance and resilience. So every time you think, and maybe the first time getting into the shower is your first wall, turning on the tap might be the first wall that you have to overcome, but after that, there'll be a time once you've adapted that your body again will say, do you know what, I need to get out now. And the more of those walls you can overcome, the more times you can fight that urge to leave, the more benefits you'll have towards your resilience, if that's your aim. For the physiological benefits, 11 minutes as a threshold, and just go for it, bro. Just rock out for 11 minutes in there. Do whatever you need to do. Fucking bang your tunes, breathe deeply, sit down. I've actually been quite enjoying that recently. It's just sitting down inside of my cold showers and looking like a dickhead in there, but just sitting there and breathing deeply and letting the cold hit me everywhere, feeling that shiver, feeling that cold deep within me. So anyway, the conclusion, basically I fully recommend taking cold showers. If you suffer from any sort of inflammatory illnesses, I recommend it. If you're an athlete, I recommend it. If you have depression or a mental illness, it's very good for you. Or if you have no issues at all and you just want to optimize your life that tiny bit more, then cold showers are perfect. The increases in dopamine are great. The increases in epinephrine are great. The hormetic stress that it puts your body through, the kind of adaptations to that stress that you build, the lowering of blood pressure and heart rate, all of these things are so beneficial for us. I didn't even speak about the whole brown fat thing, which we had a whole section on. The brown fat conversion, the fucking metabolic increase. There are so many benefits to cold showers that it baffles me that people aren't doing them. It's on par with things like cessation of addiction, like we spoke about in NoFap, or with meditation. You need to be taking cold showers, at least 11 minutes a week. And some people, right, this is a problem with me. So I'm in Australia at the moment and it's Australian summer and the shower ain't cold, bro. So I make ice baths as well. I take my cold shower every single day and just stay in for a bit longer just to kind of create that response. But then twice a week I'll have an ice bath. So I'll buy a £5 bag of ice, $5 whatever, and I'll pour it out into my bath, save half of it for later and I'll use that. It's $5 a week. $5 a week, that's £2.50. It's not that expensive. You only need half a bag of ice, fill a bath up with cold water, chuck it in, do an ice bath twice a week, one for 5 minutes, one for 6 minutes, and just again, bro, rock out. Like, do you know what I mean? It is a great thing to be doing and every single person should be doing it unless, and here's the disclaimer, unless you have any underlying health conditions which affect things like your heart rate or your blood pressure. If you have a pacemaker in, speak to your doctor before you're like inducing stress in yourself. Because for some people, cold exposure and things like ice baths especially can cause a heart attack. So if you have underlying health conditions or you think that you might, maybe you think that your heart's arrhythmic or whatever, then steer clear from it until you've spoken to a doctor. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. Manifest excellence. I'm so proud of you, brother. See you tomorrow.